Washington's got a loaded roster for 2025. Let's jump into our depth chart predictions.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He writes with me over at Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And just a quick reminder to all you everydayers, wherever you get this podcast, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, make sure to click that subscribe button, click that little bell down below so you notice when we post a new show. Plus, if you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review, as it does help the program out a lot. Now, Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all our everydayers out there today, where we know our buddy Christian Capel did this the other day. We wanted to make sure we got ours out there as well. It's time for some too deep depth chart predictions. We'll make sure we get to special teams at the very end. We'll get to defense a little bit, but we wanted to start on the offensive side of the ball because that's where Jedd Fisch butters his bread. And I think that's where there's the most debate at certain positions. So let's start at the easiest part of this entire roster, quarterback. Dezmen Williams Jr., backed up by Kai Horton, and running back where Jonah Coleman backed up by Adam Mohammad. Or do you have anything different?
Well, I'm surprised nobody's broken that news that Dezmen Williams is the starter. I remember that was a big topic of discussion last season, like breaking news sources are telling me. No, the only thing that I would add is a or behind Adam Mohammad, and that's Jordan Washington. I think that's somebody where you kind of have to factor him in. I don't think he's worthy of truly being a 1-2-3, because I don't think that's going to be how it works. I think there's going to be some special practice for him a little bit, just a change of pace type of back. But he's definitely going to play this season, so I would absolutely include him as an or.
No, I couldn't agree with you more there. I just kind of tried to keep it as strict for the most part as possible with a real too deep where one starter, one backup, except at tight end where I couldn't do that. I think this is the only position where, I've got couple others where I've got the or for a starter in terms of instead of a backup, where I have Quentin Moore or Decker DeGraff backed up by Cade Eldridge. And I feel like we might see both Quentin Moore and Decker DeGraff start at some point this season.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment given what we've seen in fall camp, and also Cade Eldridge lining up as a fullback. There's a number of things that the tight end position does with respect to blocking in this offense that I think they're all going to be the factor. We haven't really seen anybody else emerge. Baron Aonis looks good for a freshman. Austin Simmons is look good, but I don't truly think either of them going into the season are going to be on the depth chart in that sense.
Yeah, I agree with you there. It still seems like there's a pretty significant gap between where Cade Eldridge is and then where the two freshmen are right now, which is okay. And I think that this is one thing where, before we move on to wide receiver, where we had a nice long conversation about them on yesterday's show. And one of the biggest things with these two tight ends is we've seen Decker's improvement as a blocker. We know what he can do as a pass catcher, and we know what kind of run blocker Quentin Moore is, whichever coaching staff he's played for, because it seems like he's been at Washington for forever now. Every single staff has talked about him as one of the best run blocking tight ends in college football. And I think that's something that if we see both those guys against some of these big, heavy defenses that a Wisconsin might want to roll out, or some of these other teams, we'll see a wide receiver taken off the field early on in favor of Decker or Quentin or whoever it might be, depending on, what kind of look the defense is giving you. And we'll see them try to establish the run early on with Jonah Coleman behind these two tight ends.
Exactly. I don't see any other route besides that. I mean, to me, it's not that deep. It's except where it is deep, which is that receiver. And I think that's kind of where the most intrigue, I'm assuming, is for you in this offense.
I think it might still be offensive line, but it's very, very close because of, and we'll get there in a minute, but starters. I've got Denzel Boston, Rashid Williams. I think there's a fair gap there. And then for me, my third starting receiver right now is Kevin Green. I know we talked a lot about Raiden Vines-Bright yesterday as what he might be as a starter and how that could shake out. Behind these three starters, I do have Raiden, I've got Audric Harris, and I have Omari Evans. And I feel like you can really get creative in terms of formations and where you're putting guys in terms of like, is Omari the backup to Rashid, or is he the backup to Denzel, whatever might be going on there. I think that seems to be pretty cut and dry in terms of the top six. But then I think there might still be a couple other guys that get into this rotation. I'm curious if yours is any different than mine.
So the players are basically all the same. It's just I did take a slightly different route, unintended, with the opposite receiver, Denzel Boston, and that was having an or with Rashid Williams and Omari Evans. I think those two guys, obviously, are two different types of players, Omari also can play in the slot. And by the way, we throw 20 seconds here to say 2 deep depth charts really don't mean anything. They're kind of just fodder for discussion, which is important. But just worth noting, if Omari lines up in the slot this season, or some guys, move around, that's not because like, oh wait, they're trying something there. It's like, no, the depth chart is kind of just a formality type of thing, which is why I have Kevin Green in the slot. Behind him is where I get a little intrigue. I have Audric Harris with an or, along with Raiden Vines-Bright, and then another or with Dezmen Roebuck. I think he's earned some time this fall. And so you look at that and think, okay, you can also have Raiden outside, and I think you're living with one of Audric Harris or somebody else there in the slot as well.
Yeah, so a couple other names, because I didn't have Dezmen Roebuck on mine. It's through no fault of his own. I think it's just how comfortable the coaches are with a lot of the guys that were here in spring ball, which is why Raiden Vines-Bright is the only freshman listed on my 2 deep depth chart right now, where we're unsure what the status of Chris Lawson is at this point in time, where he missed a good majority of fall camp with an injury after he was by far the most productive of all the receivers that were out there during spring practice, because Rasheed Williams missed time, Omari Evans missed time, as did Denzel Boston. And I think that Chris was my pick as the favorite to be the second wide receiver to burn his red shirt. I think you and I were kind of in agreement that Raiden was going to be one of those guys as well. And I look at Justice Williams as someone who might see a couple snaps at some point this season. I feel like the coaching staff should reward him for the strong spring and strong fall camp that he's had. But Chris is one guy who I think is a little bit of a mystery right now, because, as you said, Dezmen Roebuck has certainly earned his time on the field. The question is when, where, and how much.
Exactly. I think you could say that for a number of guys on the team. And I think that's the reason also why I have Rasheed and Omari as or, is because we've yet to truly see, we know how good Rasheed Williams can be. We haven't necessarily seen it from Omari just because playing in the Penn State offense, he didn't get to showcase his skill set as much. And then you mentioned him being hurt a little bit in spring. And, he's looked good in fall camp, but I wouldn't say it's, it's Denzel Boston and then and Cass. I think is kind of how I would refer to this receiver room, but a very talented cast in their own right.
Yeah, absolutely. It just goes back to a lot of what we were talking about yesterday, which is one of the reasons this position is so intriguing, is there's just so many untested guys where we love the talent of Rasheed Williams. We love the talent of Raiden, these true freshmen, what Dezmen Roebuck has brought to the table. I don't think there's anybody in UW media who's been higher on Justice Williams than me since he committed a couple of years ago. And it's with all of these guys, there is so much talent. The question is putting it together on the field and who's going to step up and who's going to have that chemistry with Dezmen Williams. And I think it's criminal that it's taken us this long to circle back around to this, but that's why I have Kevin Green as the starter right now. He has been that guy, and something we talked about with him last year during fall camp is he has been the guy that Dezmen Williams has turned to when he needs to get out of the pocket. That's where his eyes go, is where is Kevin Green going? Because Kevin has done a really good job of looking for his quarterback and coming to the football and just finding soft spots and he's done a tremendous job of just finding ways to get open throughout the course of these different team periods of practice. And I think that's something that not only should be rewarded, but it's something where, combined with how Kevin Cummings loves to talk about him as a run blocker, I think those are things that would earn you a start at the end of the day.
I completely agree, and especially for the run blocking point, where when a coach singles you out like that and emphasizes, by the way, we have Jonah Coleman, Adam Mohammad, and potentially Jordan Washington. You need to be able to run block. It's how Denzel Boston found its way on the field as a freshman, being a run blocker, opening up lanes. The Wayne Talapapa touchdown at Oregon is kind of a perfect example of that.
No, that's a really great way to put it, because we really like what this receiver core brings to the table, but we also think that this offensive line is primed for a big step forward, and maybe behind a true freshman too. And we'll get to that right after a message from our friends over at Rugiet. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rugiet Ready. Rugiet Ready is a next-generation prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that can take hours, Rugiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue and kicks in fast, on average in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment's right. If traditional options haven't worked, Rugiet might be the answer. Over 150,000 men have already made the switch. Head to Rugiet.com/LockdownCollege and use code LockdownCollege to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockdownCollege and use promo code LockdownCollege for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law, but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit the Rugiet website for full safety information. Lars, as we look at the offensive line, I feel like more and more people are catching on to the John Mills hype train nationally. We mentioned briefly on yesterday's show that On3 has had him on their true freshman All-American list and preseason All-American list, I should say. And I'm starting to buy into that as well. I've been big on I think Pocky Mills is going to start. And now I'm not so sure because you and I both believe that Jedd Fisch kind of tipped his hand the other day when we spoke to him following the mock game. So right now, my starting offensive line is Carver Willis, John Mills, or Pocky Finau, even though I'm certainly leaning towards John Mills being the first guy against Colorado State on August 30th. Landon Hatchett, Gieran Hatchett, and Drew Rezzapardi. Do you have anything different?
No, and I agree with you. Although I do think John will get the first start, but it's going to be one of those. The only hesitation I had was I thought about why not throw an or with Champ Tuiagalelei, but I do think there is a gap between John and Champ, just enough of one to where Champ's going to still be listed, but I don't think it would be a case where he's pushed Gieran enough, to say. The other kind of intrigue in that is we have seen Pocky at right guard as well, but as we've discussed, the depth chart is just kind of a formality. So for people that are wondering, why did this guy play at this position if it's not listed on the depth chart, or why did this guy start even though this guy's the starter? Semantics and, the agendas, as the everydayers love to know, we do push on the show.
So let's get to the backups real quick, because then we can have a fun discussion about this, because I certainly have a lot of thoughts here. Where I have Max McCree at left tackle. We already mentioned left guard with the or. I have Zach Henning at center, even though I think he might end up being in that mix at right guard as well, like you talked about, with Champ Tuiagalelei at right guard, and then Sowane Fasola at right tackle. Yeah,
pretty much no notes there. I think the interesting thing for me, though, I wonder if Justin Hilkema finds his way into the two deep, if Max McCree, is listed as a right tackle potentially. I don't think it's going to be the case, but there's just, so much kind of depth and versatility with those guys where I think Hilkema could be a guy that if you listed 3 offensive linemen at left tackle, he's really going to be that guy.
So I agree with you there. The other thing, just kind of in that same mold that I know you and I have mentioned a few times, is I wouldn't be surprised if John Mills gets that kick out to left tackle at some point too, where maybe you try that, in the UC Davis game or something like that, where it seems like that's the long-term plan for him. And then that frees up more time for Pocky Finau at guard. Or, you talked about it with Champ Tuiagalelei too. Maybe you kick Pocky over to right guard. You find just different ways to make the offensive line work. And I think that's the biggest thing here, because I think where just the biggest point of conversation outside of Mills and Pocky, which, as the everydayers know, we've spent a tremendous amount of time on over the last couple of weeks, is I think it's at right guard, where I think you're right, where right now the primary backup to Gieran Hatchett is actually Pocky Finau. That way, it just feels like that's the top 3 in terms of guards right there. Or maybe this coaching staff wants Zach Henning to be a little bit more comfortable at center. And I think the other thing to mention there is the staff is very, very happy with where Champ is as a run blocker, but I think his pass blocking just still has a little bit of ways to go to evolve. I don't think he's doing anything necessarily bad. I think it's just something where there are a lot of true freshmen that's the thing that needs to continue to develop once they get on campus, because they're just so used to winning with size and physicality at the high school level, and learning how to just balance your weight and kick back into pass protection can be a little bit more difficult on some of these guys. And I think he's picked it up nicely. I think it's just something where if we see Champ on the field enough to burn his red shirt this fall, it's going to be in roles as a 6th or 7th offensive lineman down on the goal line, where it's all right, it's 2nd and goal from the half-yard line. We want to run behind this guy kind of thing.
Yeah, I don't think, also, as we noted a couple of times, freshmen really don't play on the offensive line that much. Like it's 4 games, maybe at most type of thing. So if you're talking about guys burning their red shirts, it's more a massive statement on their part than an expectation by anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned that, because before I move over to the defensive line, I think that's something that needs to be noted is when you and I are talking about these offensive linemen that are going to be playing early in their careers, it's certainly a little jarring to say the least, but it's what this coaching staff has signaled throughout its tenure here. Last year, it seemed like they were very comfortable playing freshmen. I know it's a very different situation along the offensive line, especially, but with these guys, you look at them physically. That's why we've spent so much time harping on, hey, John Mills is 6'6", 320, 325, whatever he's listed at right now. And Champ came in at 6'4", 6'5", 340, 350, somewhere in that ballpark. Those guys are big, strong, and ready to play if need be in the Big Ten Conference. So if we see them on the field, that is certainly the reason why, and why it was worth noting with Champ especially. Let's move over to the defensive line. This is where it's going to be fun, where it can be a little bit difficult, where I'm sure everybody's going to say, well, hey, look, you have 12 guys listed as starters right now. Yes, that is very, very true. but we don't know what the formation is going to look like when they walk out for that first play against Colorado State. There could be 5 defensive linemen. There could be a nickel package. There could be both, and there could be only one inside linebacker on the field. We don't know. So we went with 12 guys here. On the defensive line, my starting 5 at outside linebacker, I have Zach Durfee and Jake Blaine. And then on the interior, I have Anterio Thompson and Uiagalelei at nose tackle, at defensive tackle, and then Simone Peppa at nose right now. Behind them, 2 outside linebackers are Hayden Moore and Isaiah Ward. Defensive tackles, Armand Parker and Alinius Davis, and at nose, Logan Sagapolo. Anything different?
So I slightly,
Please, go through them.
Because I was going to say Durfee's all the same. Durfee and Lane all the same, all that. The one guy that I did include is Bryce Buter. That's the guy to me where I think he's going to find, to be fair, I did kind of write 3 down guys. And I think Bryce Buter, I'm not saying he could start, but him and Armand Parker certainly are going to earn some time this fall. And worth again acknowledging, Javon Parker is not expected to be back for the Colorado State game, as Jedd Fisch said after the mock game, but certainly a guy that ended up being a significant impact when he's able to return to being fully healthy. And I don't think for that reason he's going to be listed in the starting depth chart, but another guy that's kind of certainly worth mentioning in that breath.
Yeah, I agree with you there, where Jedd Fisch called him a game time decision for week 1, more likely week 2 or week 3. And he's coming off a torn Achilles that he suffered last September. So as you and I have said, playing it safe with him is certainly, not out of the realm of possibilities and probably the best course of action there. But I think there's a lot to dive into here, because I love that you included Bryce Buter. I was between him and Armand Parker. I just feel like we've seen a whole lot more of Armand working with Alinius Davis this fall, where I think that those are 2 guys that the coaching staff is really comfortable with. And I think they're really happy with Bryce Buter as well. And I wanted to find a way to work an Orr in there, but I just didn't want to do that too much for just the second string guys, because I think it can just get a little jumbled at different points in time. But I look at this defensive line, and the biggest thing that I found myself saying as I was writing all this down was that this line is just so much bigger, stronger, more talented, deeper, whatever you want to say. It is all those things compared to last fall. And while I certainly don't believe that this is going to be a top 3, top 5 defensive line in the conference in terms of producing sacks, I think that all of this depth and all of the fresh bodies that you can rotate in there, even if they're all playing at an average to above average rate, is something that this coaching staff and this front office, in terms of, Matt Doherty, Jake Crawford, Marcus Griffin, all these guys, can hang their hats on and say, we are really proud of this group that we assembled. We know it needs to continue getting better in terms of top end talent. And we're seeing a couple of those guys come in next year in T.I. Mukais, in Derek Coleman Brusa. And you're really happy with where that group is. It's just kind of moving in that direction. There's still work to do, but I look at where it is now, and I feel very comfortable with what this group is going to bring to the table, especially with what Ryan Walters has just kind of drawn up for them.
And I think to tie everything together, because all those are great points, when you talk about when you can come down the pike next year, I was thinking of Zadrius, but also before we get to linebacker, it made me think of Exree Alexander, who we have seen at edge as well. Another guy worth mentioning there, Isaiah Ward is also, kind of coming, still working his way back on some things. So you have some guys that are going to factor in that maybe necessarily aren't of mind right now.
Yeah, that's a big part of this too, because that's where I'm glad you mentioned Javon Parker. That's the one where I look at this defensive line as a whole, and I think he might have, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, I feel like he has the highest ceiling in the room. And from that frame of mind, I think it's very, not surprising that the coaching staff is pushing for him to get back as soon as possible. Obviously, who wouldn't want that? But I kind of look around this group again, and there's just so much talent here to say, okay, if, Bryce Buter steps up and he just has 2 or 3 sacks, but Pro Football Focus really likes what he's doing in terms of getting pressures, or Uiagalelei, who's got 45 pressures over his last 2 years at Arizona. If he can just continue to produce at that level, and Anterio Thompson, it just kind of all clicks for him and he takes that step forward. There's so much talent in this group that it's hard to believe that it can't go from being 15th in the Big Ten in sacks to 7, 8, 9, just somewhere in that ballpark.
Somewhere in the middle between the two. I mean, there's certainly going to be no worse than 10th, I think, when you look at the end of the day. And also Zach Durfee, if he's able to stay fully healthy, guys. Yeah. I know you're talking about the interior guys, but just,
No, he's very fair to bring up here, yeah.
And I think also in run support as well, like you mentioned in totally different ways, but with Kevin Green, it's like, don't forget, he's going to stay on the field a lot which is why I think, to your point, when you mentioned Ryan Walters' defense and the edge rusher position, those guys have a lot of tackles because you need to be able to do both, not just rush the passer.
Couple things here before we move on. One thing, shout out to ESPN's Adam Rittenberg for naming Zach Durfee one of the 43 sleepers around the country in terms of guys who are going to be under the radar, breakout star kind of players this fall. And I think that says a lot, not just about how he might be viewed internally, because he had a quote from Jedd Fisch in that article over on ESPN, but it also just says a lot about what his athletic potential is and what other coaches around the Big Ten who've gotten a chance to see him, despite the turf toes in both feet kind of thing, might believe he can just kind of unlock if he can stay healthy this fall. The other thing, you talk about run support. One guy who I was kind of waffling between him and Hayden Moore was Deshaun Lynch, but I gave Hayden Moore the edge because we've seen him really just be a nice producer in spurts as a pass rusher in fall camp. Well, Deshaun Lynch has mainly been sidelined with an injury. And Lars, with that being said, let's jump over to inside linebacker. Right after a message from our friends over at Open Phone. If you're running a business, every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you needed a service. If the first person didn't answer, did you wait? Probably not. You moved on. That's why you need Open Phone, so you never miss an opportunity to connect with your customers. Open Phone is the #1 business phone system designed to streamline and scale your customer communications. Do you juggle 2 phones just to keep business and personal calls separate? Open Phone can solve that instantly. Your whole team can share one number and respond to customers like a shared inbox. No more who's handling this. See why over 60,000 businesses trust Open Phone. They're offering Locked On listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/lockdowncollege. That's openphone.com/lockdowncollege. They'll even port over your existing customers for free. Open Phone, no missed calls, no missed customers. We've also got a message from our good friends over at Prize Picks, because this episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the daily fantasy platform that lets you turn your football predictions into real rewards. Preseason is already heating up, and college football isn't far behind. Whether you've got your eye on big name quarterbacks or breakout running backs, Prize Picks makes it easy to get in the game. If Prize Picks is really simple to play, just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. If you get your picks right, you could cash in and win up to 2,000 times your money. I've used Prize Picks for a few seasons now, and I really love how simple it is. I can get a lineup in while I'm getting a workout in, and I absolutely love it. Prize Picks puts their members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKDOWNCollege to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKDOWNCollege to get $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. Prize Picks, run your game. I'm not going to lie. I had a little bit of trouble here at linebacker for a minute, and it was mainly due to what do we want to do with guys like Jacob Manu and Zedric Rainey-Saleh, who I'm leaning more and more towards. Both of these guys might end up redshirting this season because as you and I have alluded to, we spoke to Jedd Fisch at the end of Washington's mock game, and he said neither guy has been cleared for contact just yet. So it feels like they might be playing it safe with those injuries for the time being. And part of that is because of the depth they have in front of them, where I've got 2 inside linebacker spots right now. My 2 starters, or 3 starters really, I should say, and something you alluded to a minute ago, is I have Buda Alukta at one spot, and then at the other one, I have Devin Bryant or X3 Alexander. I think this is something where you and I kind of talked about X3 maybe floating between inside and outside linebacker. We can get to that because I should probably mention that my 4th guy on the list right now is Anthony Ward.
Yeah, so I kind of, interestingly enough, really just penciled in Buda and Devin Bryant with, kind of that plus X3 Alexander. And I don't really know, obviously I agree Anthony Ward's going to get some playing time as well, but without Jacob Manu totally knowing what's going to be happening there, I could honestly see Jedd rolling with a 5-1-5 depth chart just for a few reasons. And I think for that one reason being you only really can have one linebacker in that defense. So you might have 2 guys on the field depending on what the packages are. But really, from a depth chart perspective, it's really 3 guys.
Yeah, that's kind of where I ran into trouble too, where with Anthony Ward, it was, we know that this is a guy who's going to play, especially on special teams, and Brian Odom has seemed really happy with just what he is as an athlete from when we got a chance to talk to him a few weeks ago. So it feels like, we might see him a little bit in different spurts this fall, but you're right. There is a very clear-cut top 3 for the most part. I feel like if we look back on it at the end of the season, and X3 Alexander has played 60% of his snaps at outside linebacker in terms of just where he was when the ball was snapped, I'm not going to be shocked. But at the same point, it's something he told us a few weeks ago. Odom said that Alexander is really nice as kind of a stack inside linebacker. He's just a big physical presence at 245 pounds. And against, I talked about it earlier with the Wisconsins and some of these teams that are going to just try to run the ball down your throat, play in and play out. Having as much size on the field is going to be really helpful. And, as much as you and I like an Alex McLaughlin or a CJ Christian, McEllisteen, whoever's going to play that box safety role, I feel like Ryan Walters is going to be a little bit more comfortable with another linebacker out there.
And I agree with that. It's just and I think it's more, that's why it's semantics of the depth chart, where which one do you end up saying are you going to play more? I think that's kind of where I factor in 5 down linemen, just because whether it's X, Jacob Lane, Jack Durfee, you just go down the list. I think they'll end up being the bulk of the snaps. And for that reason, I think you have 2 edges, 3 down linemen, 1 linebacker, knowing that you're still going to end up playing probably 3, maybe even 4 of those guys.
No, absolutely. And that's just kind of part of I don't want to say the confusion came in, but just kind of like, it's a little bit of semantics, as you alluded to earlier, with just what depth charts as a whole, right? We love depth charts, but let's jump into the secondary here, because this is the other one where I think in terms of who is going to play, we know what that's going to look like, but positions, maybe not so much. So let's start at just corners, and I'll include the nickel back in this, where I got starters. No surprise, Tacario Davis, Ephesians Prysock, and then I have Leroy Bryant as of right now. And then behind them, I have Dylan Robinson, Rashawn Clark, and Elias Johnson, even though I think there's a cut and dry top 5, and then Elias might still be a year away from the field.
And with that being said, my only pushback would be I'd have Ramon Adams behind either Tacario / Prysock, whichever one of the two, because I think Dylan Robinson probably lines up behind Tacario in the depth chart. And for that reason, I put Ephesians Prysock with Ramon Adams. Ramon's a guy that's very confident. Like from what I've seen at practice, both in spring and fall, he ain't shy. And so, and I respectfully, I think, that's why he's going to be able to beat out Elias, because from what we've seen in fall camp, neither one have truly separated themselves, but I think when you look at the high-end potential, I would lean more towards Ramon than Elias at this point in their career. But that doesn't mean the season couldn't prove otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly like where you're going with that. For me, I went with Elias because he's just a little bit more experienced at this level. But in my opinion, if something were to happen to either of these corners and you need somebody to step up on the outside, I think what happens sooner than deploying a young guy at this position, whether it be Ramon Adams, an Elias Johnson, a Darian Clemens, whoever else it might be, I think this is Dylan Robinson excluded because we know how this coaching staff feels about him. I think that we're going to see Leroy Bryant kick to outside corner and Rashawn Clark just kind of take over at nickel, because we know how the coaching staff feels about him there as well and how much he just kind of excelled during spring. I feel like he might have been dealing with an injury of some sort this fall where he missed a couple of days in the middle, and it just never felt like he was the same kind of player that he was in the spring in terms of the physicality. So I don't like to speculate here, but I think that might have been a little bit of the case because we saw Leroy just kind of take over that role and just play with a little bit more aggressiveness. And I think if there was something that might have been bothering Rashawn, that throughout the course of the fall of the season, hopefully that thing goes away and we see him on the field a little bit more, because he's another one of those guys where when we talk about safety here, we know that this coaching staff is really comfortable putting 3 safety looks out there on the field, but you might not need to if Rashawn Clark is healthy enough. But at the same point, they love the talent that they have here, where I almost felt like going for both safety spots, but I have McEllisteen and Alex McLaughlin as my starters, and then CJ Christian and Rylan Dillard-Allen as the backups. And I think that's just kind of what the rotation is going to be. Vince Holmes was really good throughout fall camp as well. He made some nice plays, showed his physicality, showed his speed and range over the top. But I think that this coaching staff and everything we've seen from Rylan, just what he brings to the field as a true spark plug kind of guy, I think that's going to give him a little bit of an edge here.
I agree. I just think I'd probably include him as an or. I mean, semantics again. I think you're probably, because you're playing 5 safety at some point, like those guys are all going to see the field. I do think Vincent Holmes, like you mentioned, did enough this fall to, solidify some playing time. How much? Well, Rylan had a pick 6 in the mock game, so we know how much Rylan's going to play. That's kind of the question, is how much and when, not necessarily like where do they stand, because we both know Rylan's ahead of him. It's just a matter of, can he continue to separate himself as the season goes along?
Yeah, and that's kind of where I'm really curious about this. And it's something where I know I said it to you, our buddy Alex Katz, and a few other people during one of the fall practices, where I said I feel so vindicated seeing Alex McLaughlin and Rylan Dillard-Allen on the field, because as the Everydayers know, one thing I've been saying for a while is that's your starting combination of safeties in 2026 right now. I think the coaching staff already knows that. I think the players already know that. And it's something where we might as well see what that looks like this fall. So if we see those two guys out on the field together this fall, I'm not going to be shocked. And, talk again with the 3 safety look, maybe he's the guy who just kind of steps in because of just what his athleticism is. Maybe you ask him to play a little bit of nickel at different points in time while Alex is walking down into the box and McEllisteen or CJ Christian is playing in the post. There are so many different things that you can do there. And I think this coaching staff has made it very clear that they are very, very happy with their talent on the back end of the defense.
Yeah, there's no question about it. I mean, I think Ryland is the guy that you just know anywhere on the field. You could probably line him up and outside the cornerback, honestly. I think he's the guy that can,
sure,
you line him up somewhere, he'll figure it out. Might not look great, but, it's going to be just, playmaking day after day, game after game. I think to me, that's why the first 3 games are going to be so important for him, because if he can really establish himself, that to me might say, hey, you know what? He might actually end up just taking that starting role right now.
So before we get out of here, let's talk special teams. I think that this one is, I know this is your favorite part of the show. Kicker, I think it's all pretty easy. Kicker is going to be Grady Gross until further notice. Kickoff specialist, though, I think Ethan Michalski is going to do that. I think Luke Dunn is your starting punter. And I think Ryan Keene is going to be handling 90 to 95% of the long snapping duties. I feel like we might see our guy Hunter Sowell get in there a little bit as well.
Yeah, no notes there. I'm just curious. Like the real one for me is going to be returner. I think that's because Ethan, I love what I saw from him on kickoffs. The coverage, you could clearly see he was working with the one unit. Grady's a good, let's say if Ethan for some reason goes down or, is struggling for whatever reason, which I don't expect. I'm sure neither of us expect that. But with that being said, Grady is still a safe security net if he does need to go back to kickoffs. But Grady is still proven in fall camp, except towards maybe that last week where it's like, seemed to be off a little bit, but I think he'll regain his form. And that's kind of why you brought Ethan in, just as that other safety net.
I think it's something where you can also just take a little bit of stress off of Grady's. Like, do you have any predictions for kick returners? Because I do have a couple.
So I do think, well, obviously Denzel Boston's your power returner until proven otherwise. I know both of us don't maybe like that, but
I think Rashawn Clark might be sneaking up into that mix too.
I agree, but I think, like you mentioned with his health, as long as he can continue to prove in those first 2 games that he's fully back, I think then that could be a case. I am curious, kind of a kick returner, because to me, I thought it would be Kevin Green, maybe some Jonah Coleman in there, but now it's like there's a few other guys that you really can see in that mix.
So who do you have? Because I thought this was pretty easy.
So I thought it was going to be Kevin Green, but that to me was, that other position I don't really kind of factor in because it's usually a running back. So I'd say Adam Mohammad maybe.
So I did have Adam Mohammad over there. We saw him just kind of being that up man kind of blocker at different points in time as well. I think it's going to be Jordan Washington. I feel like, and this is, my little rant before we get out of here. I think it'd be criminal to have anybody other than Jordan Washington back there as of this point in time. He's a 10-2 guy in high school. He's probably the fastest guy you have on the roster. You need to find a way to get his speed on the field as much as possible. And as of right now, that is the best way to do it. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the season. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So please make sure you click that little bell down below so you never miss when we post a new show, and click that like button as well, as it really does help us out a lot. If you're on the audio only side of things, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review. And with that being said, we'll talk to you on Friday.